Let's see. Well, I'm trying to expand my screen so I can see more of you guys, but it doesn't let me. Oh, here. That work? There we go. Now I can see more of you, especially all you college students that don't have your things on. Oh well, hope hope you guys are doing well. It's been a we were calculating it out the other day, and we're like, wow, you're in not quarantine, but isolation. Is that the right word? Because quarantine only happens when you get exposed. So we're just like social distancing, sort of, right? Whatever. I don't know the right term. But anyway, it's not quarantine, but we've been stuck this way since what, March 22nd, I think, is when the last time we met up as a church. So that's March, April, May, June, July, August. 5 months. It's been a while. Um, and I think in the midst of that, I think it's been challenging, right? To meet up, to feel safe going to. I think for some was the first barrier is getting to work, and then I think for others it's still out or not needing to go to work until end of the year, next year sometime. Um, so I think quarantine's been definitely challenging us to be do things differently, right? And so I think one of the things I've noticed uh, is on when we do like silent Saturdays, or the time we get together and talk about, hey, what's God been doing? I think it's been good that forces us to take time out of what we've been doing to kind of hear from God. And I think people have benefited from that. And this Bible story we're gonna be looking at is kind of interesting in that if you really read it, you're gonna see the disciples not recognizing Jesus when he comes to find them. And I don't know, I this was such a short passage. I was like, oh, it's gonna be so hard to preach. So I was actually gonna skip over it. And then Paul asked, "So are you gonna speak on Jesus going out and walking on the water?" And I was like, "But in John, it's only like 5 verses. How do you preach on 5 verses?" I'm like, sure. Blame Paul. No. Um, so we're gonna be looking at Jesus walking on the water, but there's three, well, not four, but three versions of it. You have one in John, and you have one in Mark, and you have one in Matthew, and all of them have slightly different reasons for writing it the way they do. So in Matthew, it's kind of focused on it's written to Jews. So Matthew's version is more like this is Jesus, Son of God. He's from a Jewish perspective. Like this is how he proves the Son of God. The Mark version is usually from Peter's standpoint, which is funny because Peter walking on water is actually in the Matthew version, but it's not in Mark's version. And the Mark version is more the disciples are clueless as to who Jesus is. And you're kind of like, oh, okay. So that's if you read his version, that's kind of his take that the disciples are clueless up to Jesus' death on the cross that he's actually the Christ. Okay. Um, and then in the John version, as we read it, you almost see that he just sort of skips over the whole thing. I mean, I'm going to pull the Mark version in because it helps to give some more details that the John version doesn't have. Because if you read the John version, and it's on John 6, it's it's just, whoop, oh, okay, they're done. Um, and I think the John version, as we will look at it, or I think as I'm understanding the book of John, the book of John is always asking us, who is Jesus? Who am I? Right? That's why he has all the I am statements in the book of John. And so as we read this passage, I'm trying to we'll see what happens here, but we'll see. I'm hoping that you'll see that Jesus wants us to recognize him when he draws near. Okay, so you have your Bibles, you can turn to it. Otherwise, I got it on the screen. There you go. So this is John 6, right? We just had the feeding of 5,000. There's 5,000 men, maybe women and children. Another couple thousand men and women and children there. And because they fed them, they are trying to make him king because they're assuming that he's the Messiah, and they're like, okay, he's the Messiah, or he's the prophet that we've been waiting for, and so he's gonna help us to break out of this, beat the Romans who are oppressing us right now, who are ruling over us. So that's what they're waiting for. And so they see this prophet, and this prophet is the guy that Moses, way, way, way back when, right? Exodus. They're saying, hey, Moses says there's going to be someone like me who's going to come, and he's called the prophet. And when he comes, he'll teach you more about God. He's going to do all the things I've did. So when they see Jesus doing these, this miraculous provision of food in the desert, right? Think again, Exodus. They're like, hey, this is the prophet, this guy that Moses talked about. He's going to come and free us from the Romans. And so that's why they're going to try to make him king by force, right? Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So Jesus here he's uh, kind of defusing the situation by running away from them, for lack of a better word. He's just not putting himself in that situation. It's like avoiding trouble. It's like not being out after midnight in places. Otherwise, nothing good happens at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And so that's what he's doing. Right? And then here, verse 16, when evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark. Jesus had not yet joined them. And so let me read the book of Mark to fill in a few holes here, because there's a few holes if we look at what happens in the book of John. So here, Mark, right? So right after feeding the 5,000, they're going to make him king by force. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. Okay, if you take the two of these passages together, we can get a bigger, fuller picture of what happened, right? They're going to make him king by force. They're like, hey, we're going to make you king, Jesus. You have no choice. We're going to make you our leader. And in the midst of that, he's like, all right, disciples, we talked last week, we brought up the idea of packing light. You're going to go to a protest rally, pack light. Okay, this is what happens to the disciples. Jesus is going, these people are going to riot, and it's going to be a messianic riot, right? They're going to choose a gang leader, if you will. And you disciples, you need to get out of here. So that's the word made. He made them leave. And if you read, it says he made them go to Bethsaida, which is different from what John says, right? John says they are going to Capernaum. And you might be like, okay, so what's going on? Let me jump to the map for a second. If you look at the map, you see that Bethsaida is to the top right of your map on the screen. That little red dot is maybe where Jesus fed the 5,000. You don't know. The water of the Sea of Galilee has gone down since those times, at least from what we've read. And so we don't know where Jesus was feeding the 5,000. We just know that he was. And it appears that when people are going to come and make him king by force, he says, okay, disciples, get out of here. I'll come meet you at Bethsaida. Right? Just go a little north. Just head north a little ways and wait for me there. And so here we have them, right? In the Mark version, he actually kicked them out. He said, go. And so they left, and they were going to Bethsaida. And then while they're waiting there, this is John version, while they're waiting there, like, okay, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? And that's what it says, when evening came. So they're waiting for him from whatever time they left. And they're like, okay, he's not here. He told us to go. We're going to go to Capernaum. So let's go, because he'll figure out his own way there, I guess. So they got into the boat and set off, because Jesus hadn't joined them yet. Right? So if you can get a bigger picture, right? They're feeding the 5,000. The disciples were saying, hey, go wait for me here. And maybe with the further instruction of, if you don't see me by dark, just start heading to Capernaum. And so that's what they did. They're waiting and waiting and said, okay, finally, let's go. So they start heading across the lake without Jesus. Okay. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land, right? So Jesus is there kind of watching the boat go bye-bye, and we'll see what happens next, right? Okay, so again, the map. So if you look at the Sea of Galilee, I mean, there's a little scale at the bottom. You can use your fingers to measure it. It's supposedly about 6 miles wide at its widest, and maybe I think it's 8 to 10 miles at its longest. So it's not a little lake. You guys think of Silverwood Lake where we went? It's like 3 miles from the um, excuse me, from the pier that we stand on at Silverwood Lake to the dam way out there. That's like 3 miles. If you look out from the dam straight out, that's like 3 miles, or from the pier or the dock area to the dam, that's like 3 miles. So double that. That's how, it's pretty far. You can't quite see the other side. And so here, the disciples were in the middle of the lake, and you can't say that they're, I don't think they're like in the middle of the lake, like a little further south. But they were somewhere out there from Bethsaida to Capernaum. They, seem like they're just making a short hop. It's just, they're far away from shore. That's probably the best way to understand that passage. Okay, but this is the kind of boat that they were riding in. And if you can look at that boat, you can see the back. The stern is further away from you in the picture. Well, to the left of the picture is the stern of the boat. There's a little platform there. In other stories, when Jesus is sleeping on the boatswain's thing, right? He's sleeping in the back of the boat. That's where he's sleeping, right? And so, if you notice, his boat is not very high above the water, right? It's maybe 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet. Okay, so this is the kind of boat that they would be traveling in. And so here they're traveling through, in the evening, which I don't understand. I thought they would stay there overnight, but they're traveling in the evening to go across. All right, and so in the middle of that, a strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. And when they had rowed 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. Again, let's jump to Mark to get a fuller sense of what's happened. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Right, so John gives you a little more, John's like, whoop, done. But if you look at what's going on in the book of Mark, you have to understand that the structure of the lake is like, it has these evening breezes, or it's like a bowl, and so they have storms that come in really easily there. And if you remember, when we went camping at Silverwood Lake in the evenings, we always had this major wind in the evening time, right? 3, 4, 5 o'clock. It was like crazy wind. And if you go and study like oceanography and stuff, it's called the land water effect, or sea land effect. Basically, when the water heats up, it raises up, water vapor goes up and pulls the wind in from the surrounding areas, which means the air comes swooping in, right? And so it creates this strong wind. So they're now facing this wind, and that's why they're straining against the oars. Again, if you guys remember Silverwood Lake, some people went kayaking when there was a strong wind, and some people got blown pretty far away, and some people had a hard time kind of coming back in. Yeah. And just think, that kayak was only maybe 4 inches above the water line, meaning you got your water, and then the boat sticks about maybe 8 inches above the water, and then it's just you're being the sail on the boat. Okay, now imagine that boat that we showed earlier. It's about 2 feet against the water line, and when the wind will hit that. And if you've been in a boat when it's that windy, I've been in a canoe when it's been that windy, and it's really, really, really hard to control. You start getting blown all over the place. And so that's what's going on there. They're trying to keep the boat going in the right direction. Because if you are in a sea and there's waves coming towards your boat, you guys can YouTube this one. If the boat hits you, if the wave hits you broadside, the side of your boat will roll over. And so I'm sure these disciples are now straining at the oars to keep the boat headed in the right direction, or at least into the wind. Because if they're not heading into the wind, the waves will catch them and they'll roll the boat. The boat will roll over. Okay, and it says in the fourth watch of the night. This is referring to the time. It's most likely they think this is the Roman time calendars or timekeeping, so it's like 3 to 6 in the morning. So if they left at evening, so let's do some math here. They left at evening. Let's say it's 6 o'clock. Yeah, let's be generous. Let's say it's 9 o'clock, and they're still rowing against this wind at 3 to 6 in the morning. So let's say they've been rowing for 6 hours, and in those 6 hours they've only gotten 3 miles. It's not very far. I mean, most of us can walk 3 miles in an hour. If you're on a boat, you're probably doing faster than 1 or 2 miles an hour. So that just shows you how crazy that wind was, right? How much they're fighting against the water. That they're, I don't know if their lives are in danger, but probably. And there's swells, and in the midst of that, Jesus comes walking out by them. And the words pass by them, I know in English we usually think that means like detour around people, right? But biblically, when you use the word pass by them, it means God is showing up, revealing himself to them. That's when in the Old Testament, when Moses says, God, let me see your glory. God says, okay, here, let me pass by you so you can see the back of because you can't see my face, but you can see the back. Or when Elijah was in the cave and he's sitting there, and God says, he hears the wind, right? He hears the fire, he hears the earthquake, and at the very end, it's this quiet voice, and then he goes out and he can see God's glory passing by him. So that's the idea here, that he's walking out to them in a time of distress, and then he is showing up. He's revealing himself to him. And when he revealed himself to them, you can see it. They all thought he was a ghost, because maybe I'll show you a couple more pictures in a second. But maybe they thought he was a ghost, because you're like, oh, what is he doing out here? Who is he? And if you can see the next couple pictures, you might be able to see why they responded that way. All right, so too bad Dante's away. He would have liked this next picture. Let me give you an experience of what it might have been like being on a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee when it's windy and wavy.
Oh, buddy. Oh! So, everybody just want to send you a video. Thanks for the video. Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! So, everybody.
So that is, I would never be out there on a boat that small with waves going, with waves doing that. That's crazy, because there's like 3 guys in this boat, and you already saw the water kind of coming over the top. Yeah, imagine you're in a bigger boat. It wouldn't, you would just be, and they have a motor, so it's okay. But imagine them trying to row that boat and having the wind come in that hard. Yeah, you just got a couple of those waves hit you on the broadside. Yeah, your boat's just gonna roll. It's gonna flip, right? And so here's another picture. So this is supposedly taken from Sea of Galilee. So you can imagine that similar boat to what we saw earlier. And see how big those waves are? The waves are higher than the boat. So if you're in the middle of that sea, in the middle of the night, and you have waves coming at you, and this picture probably is, it's during the day. Well, maybe it's like this. Can you see? Barely, right? You might have to make your screen bigger. I've been out in the boat when it's late at night, and you usually have a spotlight, but sometimes you don't. The only thing you see coming at you is the white wave crests coming towards you, because it's too dark to see. You don't have lights out there. Maybe you'll have starlight, and maybe you'll see the waves coming, but you don't see them very far away. And this is the predicament the disciples are in. There is 3 to 6 in the morning, the darkest time of the night. and they're rowing as hard as they can. They've gotten 3 miles, and they haven't gotten very far. And in the midst of that, they see this person appear, most likely behind a wave. Right? In our minds, I think whenever I read this, like it was super calm, and they could see Jesus walking a mile away, and he's like, "Oh, hey, someone's walking on the water." But no, it was probably like they went up one wave, came down the next, and as they're coming up the next one, they say, "Hey, look, there's somebody there," and then they go down and they go, "What's going on?" And there's a ghost, and they come back up again, and they go, "Oh, who is that?" Right? There. It was probably a crazy time for them, very stressful time for them. And in the midst of that, here Jesus comes, and they don't recognize who he is. Okay, but he said to them, "It is I. Don't be afraid." Then they were willing to let him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. In John, there's kind of a double miracle, right? There's miracles for the boat reaching where they need to get quickly. Not sure if that's a miracle implied or not, but that's what John seemed to be implying. In Matthew, we have a little more. It says, he immediately spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." And if you read the book of Matthew, this is exactly where Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come join you out in the water." And then Jesus says, "Come," and Peter gets out and he sees the wind and the waves. I mean, crazy guy, he's gonna step out into the picture of waves higher than the boat. Okay, but then here in the book of Matthew or Mark, it says here, then Jesus climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. Right? And the supernatural power of God to calm those waves and the wind. They are completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. See, in the book of Mark, they are pointing out that the disciples didn't understand that the feeding of 5,000 showed that he was, that he was God. And then here they were amazed. The word amazed there means out of their minds. It's kind of funny. Like, oh, that's a fun way to translate that. They're out of their minds. They didn't know how to process it. They didn't, again, in the book of Mark, remember, they don't know who Jesus is. They don't understand who Jesus is until much later on. And so they didn't understand. Here in the book of John, we don't get that. In the book of John, if you continue, we're getting to the rest of chapter 6 and the following weeks. But basically, right after this, Jesus is talking about, who am I? Right? And he's going to be saying, I am the bread of life that came down from heaven. Right? Or I am the bread that came from heaven. I am the bread of life. And John seems to be skipping over this episode to really focus on, well, who does Jesus say? Who is Jesus? Who do people say I am? Right? But if we kind of, I'm kind of combining the two ideas here, is that Jesus wants to come near to them and is showing himself to them, revealing himself to them, but the disciples are missing it. Right? They're missing what Jesus is trying to say to them. So here's my question for us. Or here's how we can figure out some of these things for ourselves. What storms are you guys fighting through? What kind of storms are you guys fighting through right now? Because it's, we've been in not quarantine, safer at home since March, 5 months. And definitely some people are, maybe we're more introverts, so we're okay being at home, but I'm sure some are more extroverts, are like, I gotta get out, gotta see people. But maybe it's also this, hey, what's going on? What's God doing? Right? All the things that attack our thoughts, right? The things we get stressed by or distressed by or stressed out by or depressed by or whatever it may be. Right? What storms are you desperately fighting through? Right? What things are in your lives right now that kind of like the disciples, you know, you're in a boat and you're struggling against the wind and the waves. For some of us, it's been, God said, "Hey, go this way," and we're going, and all of a sudden it's like, "Well, okay, it's kind of crazy." For others, it's just, "Hey, I don't know if God told me to go this way, but I'm here and I'm stuck in the waves." And it's pretty crazy out there. Um, but yeah, how are you guys feeling that way? How are you, recognizing what your needs are, or what's going on inside? Because that's, all of us are stuck in some storms right now. Um, but in the midst of that, know that Jesus wants to, pass by you, and that's a biblical term. But I didn't know how to phrase it right, but it's this idea of how is Jesus showing up in your life, or how is Jesus revealing himself to you right now? Because in the passage we can see that Jesus wants to draw near to people, right? He wants to come near to them. He does in the passage. He goes right next to them. He's not trying to go around them. He goes up next to them and says, "Hey, look, it is I. Don't worry." That's the same message Jesus has for us. Right? You can look at Matthew, right? "Lo, I'm always with you to the very end of the age." In Bible times, right? In Jesus' lifetime, he was, in a sense, very limited physically. He could only be in one place at one time. He could only, he couldn't be on the shore and with his disciples at the same time. He physically limited himself. In our day and age, and or how Jesus works, is he is always with us, right? His presence is always with us, whether we are aware of that or not, is really in question. Right? Do you know that Jesus is with you during your storms? Do you realize that Jesus is trying to show you stuff? And so here's the question. Where is Jesus revealing himself to you right now? Maybe I've rephrased this. Say, well, what are the blessings in lockdown? Have there been blessings in lockdown? I know for some, you're forced to be with their families more. On one side, it might drive you a little crazy. But at the same time, it forces you to have relationships with them. Maybe you got to play cards, or maybe you got to do stuff. Maybe you got to learn how to work around each other a little bit more. But if you really think about it, you've never had this much time to be with your family at any time beyond when you were a kid, if you're with parents, or if you're husband and wife, except for maybe when you were married and had on your honeymoon and maybe your couple trips, you take on your own, you've never been forced to be home. When Jahe and I first got married, we didn't have work, and so we went up to Seattle, and we didn't really know each other because we got married pretty quick. Um, excuse me. Oh yeah, I can mute myself, huh? Didn't think about that. So we got married and we moved to Seattle, and so for about 6 months, about 6 months, we just hung out together to kind of learn more about each other, because we didn't, we knew each other, but we didn't really know each other well. And I think that was that provided a real solid foundation for us. But if we didn't, it'd be like, ooh, two strangers coming together, and all of a sudden you got to live together and figure things out. But that's the blessings right now of lockdown, is that for you never had this much extended time of hanging out with your family. And yeah, it could be bad for look on like, oh, hard, but on the other side you look at, wow, it's a blessing. You don't have that kind of time, unless you take off from work. But if your work pays you to be home, you have a lot of time to catch up. Are you using that time well? In one sense you're like, wow, it's strange, right? You wouldn't think of it as a blessing, but maybe God is trying to show Himself. Hey, here's a blessing for you. Another thing about it is that I think relationships. It challenges how you carry on relationships, right? You have to be more proactive about seeing people or talking to people. You have to make Zoom dates, if you will, because you won't see them on a daily basis. And I've been forced to call my parents more, for different reasons, but it's challenged me to talk and communicate with them even more, just to see how they're doing, right? You know, and then how does that relate to Jesus? Well, Jesus doesn't say abandon your parents, abandon your family. It means that you're gonna have conflict with them at times because of values, but doesn't mean you abandon them. All right. So how is Jesus revealing Himself to you? Um, and maybe another question is, what are you learning about Jesus? And they're kind of related. I couldn't figure a better way to separate the two. Um, but what are you learning about Jesus? Like who He is, how He works, right? Because you know, for those of us who are believers, right? And so we expect God to operate very quickly, or we expect Him to operate. Sometimes we expect Him to operate in ways that make our lives easier, or not have to go through suffering, or whatnot. And in the midst of this, we find out, okay, that God is using certain processes and people to do what He wants in this world. Right? If the God wanted a vaccine to be made, He just let someone have a. If He wanted to let a vaccine be made quickly, He would just let someone do some test and stumble over the vaccine instead of it taking 6, 8, 10, however long it's going to take. Right? So in the midst of this, it's shaping how we think about God. Do we still say, hey, God's still good in the midst of a virus that's going around the world? Thousands, millions sick, hundreds of thousands dying. Is God still good? Right? And then even more than that, right? It's also this thing of what is He asking you to do? I mean, we have so much time on our hands in quarantine or in isolation, and maybe it's helping define what your life path will be. Maybe you're seeing this and going, wow, I really want to go be a scientist. Or maybe it's like, hey, I really want to get to public health. I was just reading a lot of public health people are all quitting now because they keep getting backlash from all the different people saying, hey, you guys suck. You guys don't know what you're doing. And so a lot of public health people are quitting their jobs because it's like, you know, as a person trained in public health, it's a hard job. You can never tell people how many people you save. You can never tell you how many procedures that you're writing up will prevent accidents from happening. It's not a fun job. It's fun learning, but it's hard to implement policies, especially when people counter you. But that's what they're facing. So they might be asking, what should I do? But there's a lot of a lot of the younger guys, a lot of younger men and women. Maybe Jesus is speaking to you. What do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go? What do you want to major in? How do you want to impact the society as it is? For those of us who are older, it's this, it's kind of back to, okay, who is Jesus? Who is revealing Himself to me as? Like, can I trust Him? And the the last question maybe you can think through is, how does hearing "It is I, don't be afraid" reassure you? You know, into what? That's kind of the first. Back to the first question. Into what storms are you desperately fighting through that you need to know that Jesus is nearby? That you need to know that Jesus is with you. That he wasn't trying to avoid the disciples. Right? He actually was seeking them out. He was going to reveal Himself to them. And when Peter started jumping out of the boat and walking on water, Jesus didn't let him flounder in the water a little. Say, hey, you need to reflect on your lack of faith a little more, because it's not good. You could have made it, but you kind of floundered there a little bit. So just think about that a little. Jesus didn't do that. He actually grabbed him as soon as he started sinking. Right? Jesus is reaching out and saying, hey, look, your view of me might be wrong. Understand who I am. Or maybe it might be, hey, your situation, yeah, it's hard, but I am with you. My presence is here. What situations would that be helpful for you to be reminded that Jesus is there, is with you? Because Jesus again promises his presence with us through the Holy Spirit. Jesus is always present with us. And the other challenge is that if Jesus says, "Hey, don't be afraid, it is I," it shows his sovereignty too, right? His power to put down the wind, put down the rain, put down the waves. Right? How much do we need to be reminded of that? That God has the power. That everything that's happening is within his scope. There's nothing that's taking God by surprise. That he knows what's going on. He seems to be allowing different things to happen. But in the midst of that, his plan is not being hindered. He's still asking us to participate in his plan of helping others know who he is. Right? So how are we as people and as a church? How are we responding to him? Are we recognizing when Jesus shows up in our lives and say, hey, yeah, that was God. That was a God moment, or this is really God, God-given time, and are we taking advantage of it? And I know, again, I speak to the college age who are stuck at home now. You guys are all away before you able to be away from home. And I think it's a valuable experience. I'm not saying you shouldn't try to get away from home and start learning how to live your lives apart from your parents. At the same time, there's this aspect of saying, wow, it's a treasured time to be with your parents, to shift that. You almost need the time away so you can shift to become not an adult, but to be who you're going to be, and then come back to your parents and interact with them as friends versus a child. So yeah, this is kind of where this is where God might be having you and saying, hey, look, see the blessings of what I'm giving to you right now. See what I'm trying to teach you about myself. Let me see what I'm trying to teach you about yourself. And so this is where my prayer for you will be, or is, you may recognize Jesus' presence as he shows up in your life. I was choosing this photo because I can't tell whether it's sunset or sunrise. But it's sort of like how Jesus comes in. The disciples are there in the middle of the night, right? 3 to 6 in the morning. And then Jesus came and said, it is I, don't be afraid. The wind and the waves ceased. And maybe at that time, the sun starts coming up over the horizon to reassure them that he is there, to reassure them of his power and his presence in their lives. May you have opportunities to see God in your lives. May you spend time pondering on that and seeing him and seeing his fingerprints in your lives. So let me pray for us. Lord God, we thank you that you don't just let us go and flounder, but that you promise to be with us, Lord, that you are there with us in the midst of the storms and the craziness of life. And Lord, may you speak to each one and let them know that you are here, that we don't need to be afraid. Lord, may your presence, may we be even made more aware of your presence in our lives right now. That we may hear you speaking to us, that we can hear you, we can feel your touch in our lives. And Lord, help us to know that you're nearby, and that you desire us to recognize your presence in our lives. Lord, so we thank you. May you continue to You continue to show us that you're a good, good, good God that loves us and cares for us. All right, so